days and still just be scratching. Meyer, and this one I get such a kick out of because this is my experience with him. 3 years ago, every time I go to Switzerland, I sit with Billy and we talk. And sometimes because you can learn more from what he's published and what Wendelle and everybody's put together than you can sitting and talking for 15 minutes, right? Because what's he going to tell you in 15 minutes when you can read for hours? So sometimes we tell jokes to each other. Sometimes I talk about the hinges and the doors and how their property's built and everything works with nature. So I'm sitting in his office with him, like you just saw at that little computer. And I look over to the side, just to the right of where you saw him there, he's got a printer. And there were a bunch of sheets of paper in there. And he says, oh, yeah, that. He says, I write the spiritual teaching for the Pleiadian people. And Quetzal comes here, and he picks up the papers, and he goes back to the ship, and he takes it back to their world. He says, but you know, this is very time-consuming for them. I said, oh, I'm sure. He says, so next week, this is 3 years ago, he tells me, Zaphanat Paneak is coming. He's going to fix my computer so when I type in the teachings, they go to a separate server and they send them to a little disk monitoring the Earth, and that sends them back to the Pleiades. I go, Zaphanat Paneak is coming, great. So we talk. The next May, I'm there, and this a year has passed. A lot of stuff has obviously gone under everybody's bridge, and I thought, you know, I got to see if I can trick this guy, because maybe he makes this stuff up somehow. I said to him, so Billy, how did Zaphanat Paneak ever show up last year? He said, yes, of course he did. He says, you know, I write the spiritual teaching for the Pleiadian people, and Quetzal always has to come and pick the papers up and take he tells the story. He says, Zaphanat Paneak, he came and he fixed my computer. Now, I just type into it, and it goes to a separate server, and it goes to this little disk that monitors above the Earth, and it sends it back there. I said, oh, that's great. And he says, yeah, but there's a problem. I said, what's the problem? He says, he screwed something up on my computer. Now he's got to come back and fix that. So now he's got an IT from outer space, right? So last May, third year, I'm sitting with him. I'm thinking, okay, we've got another year down the tubes here. The guy has to be a genius if he can keep track of lies like this. So I said, so Billy, how's your computer working now? Oh, yeah, Zaphanat Paneak, he came, he fixed it. You know, because I write the spiritual teaching. He does the same darn. So we went to Switzerland, this director buddy of mine and I, in September, to make we're doing a documentary, and I'll show you a little bit on it, on Meyer and the people. And I said to my buddy Jack, a German guy, I said, Jack, I've had this experience with Billy with this thing. I'm going to ask him again. He tells the same thing with one addition. He says, well, you know, I write the same thing. He goes, and Zaphanat Paneak, he says, now all I have to do is type in a code, and it goes to a separate server, to a disk above the Earth. So I'm thinking, you know what? I could ask this guy this question for the next 10 years. I'm going to get the same answer.
Marcel Vogel, a senior scientist and chemist with IBM, had been carefully analyzing the tiny metal fragments Sunyasa had given Billy. Metallurgical analysis had revealed the presence of the rare earth element thulium, but it was through the lens of a scanning electron microscope that Vogel made his most amazing discoveries.
I could not explain the type of material that I have and its discreteness by any known combination of materials. I could not put it together myself as a scientist. If I were to take these combinations and put it into a furnace, melt it, and pour it out and pull a little ingot, I would see all of these elements present there in any one area. But I don't. I see this discrete bits of material. Now, it can only happen by some form of a cold fusion process where you have the elements present and you fuse them together so they still maintain their identity, but they interpenetrate into one another. It's also a challenge because I showed it to one of my friends who was a metallurgist, and he shook his head. He said, I don't see how it can be put together. And that's where we are right now. I think it's important that those of us who are in the scientific world sit down and do some serious study on these things instead of putting it off as figments of people's imagination.
Could I say this material is extraterrestrial?
It doesn't look like anything that we've made here. At this moment, I would feel very much inclined to accept what was given to me as being true. I respect the people I've met so far, their integrity, their willingness to work. Mr. Delatosa in his work on photography, and Mr. Stevens, the way he has done his best to give me specimens. We have all done this for one thing, to serve and to find out what truth.
That guy was the inventor of magnetic tape for IBM.
He was a certified, I mean, he was a genius. And it's interesting, the skeptics, this poor guy attacked, I had made a typo in something I posted on my website where I had said that Vogel used the scanning electron microscope to discover thulium, which was an error. Well, the poor skeptic, despite having all this material for 6 years, never reads your books, never does the homework, because clearly in the documentation in your preliminary report, they speak of we have to use energy dispersive X-rays and X-ray diffraction or something, and spectral analysis. And Stevens says all that about how they discovered thulium and rhenium and argon gas and all these other elements. And in another segment of the metal analysis tape, he actually shows the spectral analysis of thulium. So the skeptics are just, they don't know it yet how badly sunk they are when this comes out. He said, in effect, as you heard, that this has to be a cold fusion process or something done in outer space, and we still don't have it.
In a vacuum, he said.
In a vacuum.
Vogel said the only way this alloy could exist would be through a cold fusion process in a vacuum, because there's no bubbles, no ash, and the mix is perfectly blended.
And,
And the only cold fusion process we have is electrolytic. And it's not in a vacuum.
he found on some of the faces, he found machining, a very discrete, obviously mechanically precise machining that he says must have been done with some form of a laser that he doesn't have access to. So he's got a metal sample that's simultaneously crystalline with every element in the periodic table, including thulium and rhenium and all the rest of the stuff, and micro machining, and it's given to him by Wendelle Stevens, who received it from a Swiss farmer. So we're laying a lot of things on the table. Again, this is why, can you hard prove anything? Well, it's up to you.
That you playing, Mark?
No.
Oh, okay.
Wir sind hier auf der Erde, unser Leben zu führen.
We are here on Earth to live our lives so that the consciousness can evolve, so it can collect knowledge and wisdom, build love, freedom, and harmony. So that the human can learn he stands here in the material life on Earth, exactly as other human civilizations do on other worlds and in the entire universe.
Im gesamten Universum dasselbe tun.
Nein, ich kann es allein nicht picken.
Mein Name ist Eduard Albert Meyer.
My name is Edward Albert Meyer, but around the world I'm simply known as Billy. I received this name when I was in Tehran on my journeys. Since then, this name has remained with me.
Und seither ist mir dieser Name geblieben. Hier ein Andenken, das man...
Here's a souvenir that they had nailed onto the main door to my home. It's enough, you dog, you will be put down. Shortly after they had nailed this letter to my door, there was another
an
attempt,
die Türe genagelt war, hat es dann einige Tage später.
and they tried again to catapult me out of my life and shot at
Aus
me.
dem Leben befördern wollen und hat auf mich geschossen. Und hier ist der Platz, als ich
And
rein...
here's the place that I once was told to come for a contact. Jacobus was here with me and two other men at the late night hours. They shot at me from down there.
Da hat man von hier drunten hat man auf mich geschossen. Das habe ich aber Tage zuvor.
But I had dreamt about this days before, and it hung a metal plate in front of my chest under the jacket, and an agenda, and the shot went into the agenda and into the metal plate.
Genau in die Agenda rein und in die Metallplatte, und so hat es mir das Leben gerettet. Durch einen Traum, den ich zuvor hatte.
And so my life was saved through the dream I had. Because I always have dreams which show me events that will come true in the future.
Can we all have dreams like that?
Es können eigentlich alle Menschen.
Actually, all humans can have these kinds of dreams if they concentrate and start to steer their dreams. And when they make themselves somehow capable to have visions through their dreams, they will have truth dreams, and so on and so forth.
Wie durch die Träume eben Visionen.
But it depends naturally upon the human concentrating hard and using his consciousness to truly direct the energies and powers that come out of the
Der
consciousness.
Mensch sehr konzentriert sein Bewusstsein dazu benutzt. Nach der linken Seite hier auch.
Up to the left side over here where the road goes into the forest, Langholz is situated there, and that also has gotten us great photographs.
Is that where the log pile was?
Yeah.
I recognize that.
Where are we going now, Billy?
Down there to the lower satellite, where we are able to make photographs of Semjase's beam ship.
Machen konnten mit dem Strahlschiff von Semjase.
That's like the most famous, I think.
Yeah, that's the one on the cover of the big picture book, right?
Yeah. It's also our movie poster is taken from that too. Have to tell you about this title. So, allegedly, a year or two ago, or maybe a little more, there was a contest on the Pleiadian planet Era, and the contest was for someone to create a slogan that embodies what Billy Meier's work and mission on Earth is. And the winner of the contest would get to come and meet Billy in his office. And there's some funny stories about meetings with Billy in his office too. Anyhow, someone won the contest, and the slogan is the silent revolution of truth. And the winner was an 11-year-old girl. And about, I guess, a year or two ago, whenever it was, Ptah brings her in, and I saw an unofficial translation of the contest. It's just very, it wouldn't have to be somebody from outer space. You know, it was like, it's a pleasure to meet you, sir. You know, and it's my pleasure to meet you, young lady, you know, blah, 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 blah. And she says, well, I feel we may never meet again, but I'm so glad to have had this opportunity to come and, you know, visit with you. A couple times when I talk to Billy, he'll talk about the people, you know, the Pleiadians and what it's like. And he says at one time, Ptah came with these three young women. One was 162, one was 230. They live longer, so. And he says they're very nice. He says they're very different than we are. I said, well, what are they like? And he says, they're just very different. They're human beings. He said, and it's just what he said without words. The pain of the comparison was palpable. And he says, after we had been introduced and had a short conversation, they wanted to go look around the property and look in the bird cages and things. And he said, so I told them to be careful. He said, well, don't worry, we will screen ourselves again so no one can see us.
To being objective, okay? And you do it through questioning, learning, and evidence.
Which is what you're saying. Do the hard work. What is provable?
Right.
In this case can do that. I mean, hey, look, Elijah was taken up to heaven by a chariot of fire in a whirlwind.
What was that? What was it that Ezekiel saw that had a rim with spokes and eyes on it and had a wheel within a wheel? I mean, and what was it that lifted up from the center of the village and the glory of the Lord and set down on the eastern mountain? If this man, a primitive man, is describing to the best of his ability an advanced machine for which he has zero reference point.
Correct.
Right. He'd never seen a bicycle or a flashlight.
Correct.
Right.
And he gets it pretty darn close. The fact that he didn't go nuts is pretty good. So he's describing this thing, but it's the whole mystique and mythicism and the fear. Because the thing that religion implants isn't just, well, believe this, believe it or else.
Yes.
And that's the
correct.
thing, because once the fear has got you like that, that's the thing that a person is going to have the hardest problem with. Well, what if this, I'll be punished for eternity. I'll be dipped in a molten lake like a marshmallow and hot chocolate for the rest of eternity, you know, or whatever.
You know, I liked an argument one time when Semjase had said that there's no religion that's valid, all false. And she said, even your term describes it accurately. You spell it religion, R-E-L-I-G-I-O-N, She says that 2 Greek words means tying yourself to the past. Re legion. She said you should even be. You're even quoting it correctly if you spelled it R-E-L-E-G-I-O-N. That's re legion. You would have tying yourself to the future. Is what you should be doing. Eon instead of ion. And so she said, even your term describes your situation. You're all false.
Yeah, you're tying yourselves to the past. I know.
Yeah.
You know, when people ask me what, do I believe in God? I just tell them, I don't have to decide that now. And it flabbergasts them. But it's a way to just deflect the criticism.
And then the rest of her argument was that our religions require us to believe dogmatically by blind faith alone.
That's right.
And she said that we should know what we believe. That the whole thing is to know what you believe, not accept somebody else's belief, because to that degree you're binding yourself to somebody else's ideas
Or mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's curious that their prophecies, I mean, George should have heard this, is they're saying there's only going to be one more pope.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not too far away.
Yeah.
Is that from them, or is that from
That's
something
the
else?
Enoch
Well, actually,
prophecy.
that's where religion as an institution collapses, and
Yes.
something else takes its place. Common sense.
Right.
And they say that.
Well, you know what? Maybe this dinner is the start of that.
Because
Yeah.
the Pleiadians argued that nobody needs an intercession
Thank
between
you very
him
much.
and the creation. That
Correct.
the creation is in everybody. And you don't need somebody else to meet it, to get to it.
Right.
And so intercessors were introduced by men to control men.
And it was part
Right,
of it.
control. Right, men to control
All
men.
control, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, it
that's-
was really part of the sky people that they initially introduced religion, right, to control the ignorant human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the group
Let
that
them
was
believe that they were gods.
the Baphath.
They made them believe they were gods, right?
Yeah, there is no such thing as a,
Right,
as
but-
a
but-
true God. There's
is-
the creation, which is everything.
Right.
Right.
But if you give it a term, you've personified it, and then it's not correct anymore.
But they're one of the reasons they're here is to try to correct their own
Correct their
mess-ups.
own,
'Cause
errors in
they made some mistakes in their earlier years with us.
Deliberate, and they're trying to undo it. Yeah,
They did it deliberately.
Well, they're
yeah, they
forefathers.
set themselves up as gods and let the
They let us believe they were
primitive
gods.
people believe that they were God.
Got it. Okay.
Pretended to be.
And then you had the Baphath, the splinter group of the Pleiadians, who were based underneath the Giza Plateau for a long time, who didn't get run off the planet until like 1978 or so. And they were the lineage of Jehovah and the different gods within that lineage that had come down, Kamagal, Jehovah, all these things, who had been, they instituted blood sacrifices in religions.
Yeah, those personified gods were very ruthless and
Yeah, they were.
and
Horrible. And you know what else it makes you think about? See, this is where this whole ET thing, if these were beings, let's say these gods that were here, the Baphath, extraterrestrial humans that could travel in space, they settled here to control a bunch of primitive people. So there's got to be a demystification of space travel and extraterrestrials and all this stuff. We're just all evolving. These people that were more evolved, certainly technologically than we, bound themselves to control us on this planet, set in motion terrible things. They were a driving force behind Hitler and other things like this. So is it enough that somebody can travel in space or is an extraterrestrial? Or is it really about what the Meyer case is saying, spiritual development and evolution?
That's what it's about.
What do they say about? I mean, because you had mentioned other races that are here and have. I mean, I think I
They said
remember reading in your book that 167 or some big number.
107.
many have come and gone.
Many have come and gone.
Yeah.
But I mean, what do they say is contemporary?
The ones that are here
Yeah, I
at
mean,
the time of the
there's Pleiadians.
Well, they're saying
Yeah.
there's nobody else visiting us, right? Isn't that what
That
they're
they've
saying?
left.
They've all left.
Basically.
The expeditionaries are all gone. Yeah, we're on our own again.
There may be.
And they're worried about whether we're going to survive because we create our own future as we go.
Right. But what about the Greys and all of the other stories? Are they saying that's all bogus?
Well, they don't want Meyer to waste time pursuing other stories, and so they tell him that they're not real, or if they're not real, that they're misperceptions. They do everything they can to defuse his energy,
To keep him focused
keep
on.
him focused on what they want him focused on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me read this to you from the first contact in reference to other civilizations. All right? So there exist sorts which acquired much knowledge and freed themselves from their life regions, and they also travel through the universe, and here and there they come to the earth. Many of them are rather nasty contemporaries and live in a certain barbarism which is still worse than yours. You ought to be on your guard before these, because they often attack and destroy everything that comes in their way. They have even destroyed whole planets or beaten their inhabitants into barbarous bondage. This is one of our missions, to warn the Earth human of these creatures. Let this be known to the Earth humans, because more and more the time approaches when a conflict with these becomes unavoidable. That is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know
Well,
what?
there's things more scary than that. Just read the last prophecies for the next 100, 200 years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You mean the ones from Jeremiah?
Contact number 215.
Okay.
That
Oh, I think
shows-
I have that.
251?
describes the Third World War and the Fourth World War.
251.
251. Was
Yeah,
that a separate
251.
book?
By the Fourth World War, our whole system of weapons and combat instruments has changed. We've got away from projectiles and are using rays and beams. But
Well,
they're
that's in
even
Enoch
more
prophecies. They mentioned that as well. And
Yeah, and it's in 251. You can read 251 for free if you go to my newsletter archives, July 2005. It's the 3-part thing in there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, there's some wicked stuff in here.
Starting to
man.
wind down, Wendell?
Run
How
down,
about, how
yeah.
about some coffee?
Oh, that would be good.
You got it. Let's get some caffeine. How
Yeah,
about you,
yeah.
Wendell? Or Mike?
I don't know. That might keep me awake.
Oh.
I mean, at night.
Uh-huh.
I'm awake now. Don't worry. I just look like I'm asleep.
We'll get you some coffee. And let's see. So I mean, there could be other things, like you said, that they're trying to keep him focused. So they're not giving him every ounce of truth that they're probably is. I mean, do you think? I mean, you've investigated a lot. Is this the only? This is not the only case you've investigated.
Over 100 like this.
Yeah. Okay. And do you see evidence of that? Do you think that some of these other ones are real?
Visitors are trying to persuade their contactee to a particular kind of belief that they want to advocate.
You do not see that?
I do.
You do?
In most cases, yeah. Yeah. They once they make contact, they try to guide him.
Are most of them humans?
No, they're about 1/3 humans, about 1/3 what we typically call grays now, and the other third's a catch-all category that includes all the rest of them, avioids and amphibioids and
Bug type creatures.
intelligent creatures of all kinds. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they all carbon-based
They're
life forms?
Not all. There's some life forms that have exoskeletons like insects that like the praying mantis type.
Yeah. Right.
They're as big as humans. They're as intelligent as humans. They have manipulative digits and have evolved technologies and produce spaceships and travel in space in them. You know, at my age, at 84 years old now, I've come to a conclusion that I think the natural habitat of human life is space itself, that planets are like nests. Life is incubated in the planets. It matures to a stage where it leaves the planet and never comes back, just like birds leaving a nest. And they become intelligent, evolve a technology, produce escape vehicles to get away from the nest. And in time, they make the escape vehicles perfect habitats. And each group that moves aboard one of these habitats eliminates the ills and emphasizes the positives until they have a utopian ideal that they're living aboard their self-created and self-generating space ark. And they don't have any need to go back to a planet ever again unless some of them want to become adventurous and land on a planet and start a new colony.
It goes on for a long time.
Because some of these are space, in my experience, there are many different kinds of these huge space arcs. The Pleiadian ship at 10 miles diameter is not the biggest one. There are others that are considerably bigger than that. I know one that's 20 kilometers, and well, that's 10 miles, I guess.
12 or so,
Yeah, almost, yeah.
Still
They're-
pretty
they're
darn
spheres?
big.
Big, no, that's a
Are
fat
they-
cigar shape, yeah.
Huh?
That's a fat cigar shape.
Fat cigar shape? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. But, yeah,
Then there are some that are grotesque designs that have projections sticking out all over the place.
yeah, we haven't
These
seen
are
any of those.
descriptions, but no photos, right?
No photos.
Is it, there's nothing else that has clear daylight photos like this, right? Or is there?
No others as good as these. And the reason, again, is because they actually posed the ships. There was no problem getting the good pictures. They just flew them slowly before his camera.
Yeah,
I
okay.
remember you did a presentation at the Showboat on your best photos.
Oh, that's a long time ago.
That was a long time ago. Might have been I think it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
But you had a copy of a ship, I thought it was maybe near Puerto Rico, coming out of the ocean with the water falling off of it. Have you seen that
Yeah,
one?
there was
seen that
one
somewhere.
that came out of a bay in Puerto Rico, yeah.
This reminds me that in the Enoch or Enoch prophecies, they talk about if there comes a third world war after the U.S. has extended its power, that various countries start turning into alliances with each other against the U.S. and they get help from an ET race. It says
Well, yes.
in there. That's an interesting.
Well, and it's
When-
curious because in Matthew, when Jesus is talking about those days, he said, if those days will be shortened, and if it were not for the elect, all life, that those days would be shortened. And it's similar language to what those Enoch prophecies are saying.
Well,
that
that's in the Talmud Emmanuel. He says, if powerful beings did not intercede as they did in the past, I tell you, no life would remain on the planet.
But they're
will.
saying in this Enoch prophecy, it seemed to me, I remember them saying that they will stop basically the U.S. and Russia, because they're the ones that are going to have these fabulous weapons.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, look at this.
What on earth?
Ooh.
This is
A
thank
little,
you.
little of this, little of that. Get some coffee.
Good
please,
night.
gentlemen.
Just for two?
Huh? I just.
I better to get a little too, I think.
All right, 2 coffees, Dave? Coffee?
No.
Just 2?
Just
Glass
two?
of wine, maybe.
Oh my goodness.
I don't.
Cherry cobbler.
This is a red grapefruit brulee.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Did you pick all these dishes out?
Yeah.
God, wow. Really great.
Thank you.
I've never had anything like this in my life, to tell you the truth.
You come to my parties and I go crazy on food. I love to cook. My wife doesn't cook.
Thank you.
So
You're kidding.
So I do 99% of the cooking in the house, which means we do eat out a lot. And, I do a lot of cooking. I'm a good cook. Dave will tell you, I've put together a lot of really scrumptious meals. And but
Wow.
this is like my wife and I
Jeez.
favorite club, and we come here a lot.
Changing shape, color, and tone all at the same time. How would you pronounce it or write it?
Sounds
All
like
of it.
Prince's name.
All their names are like that, so it can only be transmitted telepathically.
The Pleiadian, formerly known as Semyazi.
He said, well, what's the sannyasi? She said, well, that was a name for recognition, but she says it does have meaning for you. He said, what about Quetzal? She said, that also has meaning for you from your past. Ta, same thing. So none of those are their real names. Their real names couldn't be written or pronounced, but those were names that for recognition, for ability to associate with them for recognition. They all had relationships with him at one point or another in the past.
Yeah, Wendelle shared that the group that's around him, a lot of them have been with him through other incarnations. Now, Wendelle, you were talking about a trip that Wendelle was taken into one of the pyramids where they found a document.
Oh, that was, he
Ascot?
was still encountering Ascot. And she took him to the pyramids one time, landed, there was a Bedouin camp being set up there, landed right beside of it, and she reached in a drawer and handed him a little device about the size of a Zippo lighter and says, put this on your belt. And he says, what's that for? And she says, that'll keep them from seeing us. It was a cloaking device. She put one on her belt. They left the ship, walked right through the Bedouin camp, through a tent where they were preparing a Bedouin girl for a wedding or something. And a bunch of women were working around her, sitting on a stool in the tent. And they stopped. Meyer looked at, they were fixing her hair, and on impulse, he bent down and kissed her on the lips like that. And she jumped up, and the women scattered, and Oscar says, "What'd you do that for?" He said, "Oh, I just wanted to see what would happen." So they went on through the tent, they're unobserved, and they went to the Great Pyramid and to a place on the pyramid where there was an aperture and a guard, an Egyptian guard. They walked right past the Egyptian guard. He didn't see him at all, and down to this might not have been the pyramid, it's in the Valley of the Tombs there. She took him to a tomb that she said the English had opened years ago, and they opened it with dynamite and started a fire in the tomb, and the Egyptians found out about it, and they ran the English off and put the guard on the tomb. The tomb had been guarded ever since. She said, "There's something interesting here I want to show you," and she took him to a corner of the room where there was burned evidence of a fire in the corner. She stirred in the ashes and pulled out a little piece of paper about that long and about that wide, singed on all sides, and handed it to him. She said, "Here, you may find this interesting." And he looked at it and he said, "How will I find this interesting? It's in a strange language. I can't read it." She said, "Here, I'll help you. Give me your pencil." And he gave her his pencil. She wrote German equivalent letters under a few of the characters on this little piece of paper. And she says, that ought to be enough. You can work it out from there. So I found that in his desk drawer when I was going through the desk drawer looking at stuff. I said, "What's this?" He told me the story, and I said, "Well, what does it say?" He says, "I haven't tried to work it out." I said, "Well, let's see what we can do with it." So there wasn't a full German alphabet there. We had to reconstruct enough words till they would make a phrase, and then we could accept that as possibly correct. And then we could extend it a little bit. And we identified more German letters for the missing characters until we had a pretty good representation. By the time, it just took us several hours to do this. By the time we got done, the main message on it was just a one paragraph part out of a page, and it said the line of prophets is as follows. And it started with Enoch, Elijah, Elisha, and on down the line of 7 prophets that he had already been told were past incarnations of his, and we got down to the last word, the 7th incarnation as a prophet. And when we converted the words to German letters, it spelled Billi. And his eyes looked up at me, and I looked at him, and he said, he didn't say anything. He looked like mouth open, and my mouth was open, and we were looking at each other, wondering, could that have been their spelling of it or what? And I was always puzzled by that, because he was truly surprised when we reached that last part and it said Billi. I went like that.
So you and he did the translation?
Pardon?
You and he did the translation?
He and I did the translation, and then we got Michael Hessman to read the whole thing in right context, and
okay.
it said this is the line of succession of the prophets of such and such.
It occurs to me you have a sample of her handwriting.
It's in the book. Well, it's on in Messages Volume 2.
What's it in? The book
The photograph of the piece of paper
is
the letters that she put on it in the stages. Her letters and our edition of the letters and the finished translation.
and what book is that in?
I think it's in the first part of Message 2.
Okay. All right. Is that the picture book
Some-
or
one of
your,
it has
of your preliminary investigation
It's
part?
photographs, and it's before the book starts. It's I
The
told
contact
that.
notes too?
Yeah, contact message, contact.
I've got that, if that's it.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Wow.
You know, I mentioned about the skepticism of the UFO community. Some of the people I really respect have basically been pretty tough on the. Jacques Vallée is one. I mean, he's a great man and great researcher, and Stan Friedman has done a heck of a lot. My question is whether or not they've had a chance to do very much of the research, because that was one of the things I found when I was interviewing ufologists about this, is that they basically had turned their backs on it because they felt they'd been shut out. And I don't know if
they
somewhere...
don't even want to read it, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that they felt they'd been shut out by you, that they did not have an opportunity to do firsthand work or analysis or whatever. I don't know what they tried to do or what they tried access they tried to do. I'm sure very few of them tried to go over and meet
Let
with
me
Billy
tell you a
Meier.
little story. You mentioned Stan Friedman. Right after the first article in Saga magazine, just a short article, Friedman flew to Tucson and he came to my house, rented a car and came to my house. He said, "Can I see some of that Pleiadian material?" And I said, "Sure." And I showed him the pictures that I had at the time and some of the contact notes, and he says, "Jesus Christ," he says, "do you know, he says, I've got connections. I can get this analyzed properly. Why don't you let me take it?" I said, "Well, we're already in Kodak International and all the big photo facilities studying the pictures. We don't need any help. We're already, other people are interested and they're already here." He says, "You mean you're not going to let me in on it?" And I said, "No, how can we let you on? Can you afford to go back and forth to Switzerland? We can't carry you on our back. We can't fund you." He says, "Jesus Christ, you're going to hog all this to yourself?" And he turned around and stomped out of my house, got in his rented car, and attacked the case ever since.
Wow.
He came to a presentation of mine in Hawaii 2.5 years ago and just sat there, wouldn't talk, never introduced himself to me. I think, and I didn't know that he'd come to your place because there's always a feeling like there's something about he doesn't want to reveal something, and maybe it's his own.
He refused to look at the case after that.
Yeah, and he would have to show that he has interest in something that he doesn't really have authority in, and it's much easier for some of the people to try and be dismissive. But really, where do you see photographs like this? Where do you see films like this? Where do you see metallurgists from 22 years ago or more getting up and saying, "Well, I can't make this, and here's what it's made out of," and sound recordings, 3 different sound studios that I know of, 7 or 8 different sound engineers that all went through the sounds and said, "Well, we've calculated formulas showing that there's 8 inaudible frequencies. The patterns are so discrete and the shifting is so fast, we can't duplicate them. We don't know what the sound source is."
You know, the one recording that was recorded on 4 recorders simultaneous, so we had stereo recording. His wife was holding an Iowa shoulder recorder that had a needle on it. And there were 2 smaller recorders, I don't remember the make anymore, but they were just a little one you push the buttons on to turn them on and off. And Billy was right under the craft at Obersadling, where the log pile is. And his wife and 13 other people were standing about 3/4 of a mile away on the top of the hill, where you're looking down on the log pile. And the craft was right over Billy's head. And the sound was so loud to Billy that, first of all, the needle on his recorder went clear over to the distort and stayed there, stuck on the high side pin. And the sound was so loud he had to take his jacket off and wrap it around his head, hold it tight until the sound lasted about 20 minutes. And when it stopped, he was stone deaf. He could barely see, and his head was splitting with a splitting headache. And his wife and the other witnesses from the group that had the other recorder also was pegged at the top distort range, but she copied it a little clearer than his. And both of them were pretty good recordings. The 2 small recorders stopped running after about 1 minute and 30 seconds of the noise because of the loud audibility, because he took them to a repair shop the next day and they worked all right again. They just had copied a few seconds and quit. Now, while they were doing this, a group of people ran into the scene from a little town 3 kilometers, that's 1.5 miles away down the hill, running, looking for the noise source, and came into the scene before it stopped. But they didn't see the craft because it was they had only opened the screen in Billy's direction, and his wife and the other witnesses couldn't see the ship from the side. They hadn't opened the screen in that direction. So there's always a question about how much they actually saw. They saw the tape recorders working, they heard the sound, they saw Billy hunching down with his jacket around his head, and they witnessed his eyes were completely bloodshot. He got black eyes from the tissue, from the sound. So when we got it out in Michael Pinder's studio out in California, and we're trying to get it that loud to see what it felt like, and with all the audio gear he had, we couldn't get it loud enough to to duplicate what Billy experienced. And then we took it over to Michael Pinder's shop. And we did the same thing there, and he didn't have as good of equipment as Neil Diamond. But, and we took it to another shop, one more shop besides that out in Hollywood, tried to do the same thing. They're the ones that put it on a scope where we could watch the changing patterns of the various different frequencies emitted simultaneously. There were 24 frequencies simultaneously emitted, and all varying in a random sequence, so that they would all fall on a line only occasionally, the same line. Then they would split, and the screen would just be covered with a wide pattern of all the waves overlapping each other. And then they sync back together where they have a pretty, running pretty much together again, about once every minute and a half or so.
George, I think Wendell's talked to us before at some of these meetings on some of the other investigators, and I seem to remember your discussion when you guys initially introduced the photo book at a UFO meeting, right? You and Lee and Britt were there, and you were greeted with, I mean, skepticism and derision, right?
Oh, yeah. It had just come off the press, and we'd gone to APRO 79, I think they called it. It was an APRO UFO conference out in San Diego, and we took 3 boxes of the books. We hadn't even opened them yet up to the conference with us, and while everybody was milling around getting registered and everything, we opened the first box, and people came by and picked them up and looked at them and oohing and eyeing, and Coral got a little upset, and she came over and closed the box and put it under her table. And went back to registering people, but people that saw her do that dragged the box out and opened it again, started all over again. And in the course of this, there was a guy that we later identified as Fred Bell, who he followed us out to our car when we took the box back outside. He bought the other 2 boxes from the trunk of the car. And then he came to Tucson and bought 2 more cases of books, 10 books to a case. I asked him, what are you doing with them? He said, oh, I got a lot of friends in Hollywood. He was passing them out to his Hollywood friends and telling them that he was in contact with Semyase too, and that she had a picket ship for his red apple, candy apple red van, that protecting him, and that then he went and wrote a book with Brad Steiger where he starts telling how he met Semyase. When he woke up one time, he saw the ship. His next recollection, he was laying in the ship, laying with his head on her lap, and she was stroking him in his brow and waking him up. And went on from there, and the rest is all total fiction, right out of front.
Hey, if he's going to tell a lie about laying with Semyase, it could be better than that. He's not stroking his forehead.
Really?
Well, I think dinner's going to be served about 8:30. Do you guys need to reset up for around the table?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love for you to
Why don't
follow
we take a
Freedom
little
of
break?
Information
Yeah,
Act.
sure.
And I know